Throughout A Hat in Time's development, there were many characters who didn't quite make the cut into the final game. Between the range of characters who never escaped the concept art stage all the way up to characters that had fully fleshed out backstories and lore, it's safe to say that there's quite a sizable list that never escaped development. Or, at least not in the form they originally planned to be in. Hello everyone, and welcome to Betafied, a show where we take a look at the unused and cut content of a game and try to figure out what it was, how it was used, and why it was removed in the final version. Today's episode is a special one to me, because this character in particular is probably one of the most famous cut characters from A Hat in Time aside from the Moonjumper. This guy's also a bit of a special case as well. Where most characters had relatively concrete places in the story, with Tim being a tutorial character, Tim's friend being a recurring character in Subcon and Calcite, etc., this guy's use was actually changed and upgraded multiple times throughout the game's development. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Thor The Inventor. So, who exactly is this tall, strapping fellow? Well, this mustached man you see before you is Thor. He invents stuff. Or, well, he did anyway. Before his eventual removal from the game, Thor had quite a load of responsibilities on his back, ranging everywhere from lore to utility. Before we get to those, though, I believe a proper introduction to the character is in order. If you've ever seen any gameplay of A Hat in Time's pre-release versions, you've most likely noticed that, instead of a simple platform that leads to some floating bits and pieces used for the act She Came from Outer Space, this portion of the level held an entire building on top of it. This building is where Thor lived, or, in the very least, where he worked, and is aptly named Thor's Workshop. This was going to be the place where Thor would spend most of his time, and where he would create his various machines and robots. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, was the player going to be able to enter Thor's Workshop? And to that I say, I don't know. In terms of common sense, one would assume so. It seems like such an obvious place for Hatkid to go in order to meet with Thor. But my attempts to find any confirmation on such an event in interviews have unfortunately met with failure, and there are no screenshots or known pieces of concept art that showcase the interior to Thor's workshop to my knowledge. Perhaps a look into the UMAP of the beta would provide us with some much needed info in the form of leftover actors or triggers, or anything else that could give us confirmation. But alas, these types of things are well beyond my understanding of Unreal 3 as a whole. Perhaps somebody else can one day look into it and provide us a confirmation as to whether or not there's anything left over. For now, though, as it stands, Thor's Workshop remains a simple landmark to times long past. Oh well. Anyway, I think that's enough about the workshop. Let's talk about the man himself. Thor the Inventor. He invents stuff. Well, he did, obviously he doesn't now, he's dead. But what exactly did Thor the Inventor invent? That is to ask, simply, what can we attribute to Thor? Well, I'll start off with things that we know for certain he made, and then go on to other potential yet unconfirmed candidates. Let's start off by taking a look at this concept art by Luigi Lucarelli from 2013. Already we can see two of Thor's inventions, one of which made it out of concept art and into the final game before ultimately being scrapped. First off, we have the Flying Sandmobile, or, as the game calls it, the Airmobile. The Airmobile we actually have in the final game. Well, okay, it's seen better days. But hey, let's take a look at some footage from the beta, back when it actually had a working actor. As you can see, it's lacking animations and sounds, but the vehicle itself is undoubtedly functional. Holding space allows Hatkid to fly in it, while in the air it sort of glides for some time before beginning to descend rapidly. You can't drive it around on the ground, unfortunately, so I suppose it works a little bit like a helicopter. The next piece of cut content we have from this art is Thor's umbrella upgrade. This metal umbrella would have been available to Hatkid as an upgrade to a regular umbrella, and presumably would have had some more functions, such as dealing higher damage. Next up on the things we know without a shadow of a doubt that Thor is responsible for, we have the cut janitor bots. Now, if you've ever played the beta of the game, or some mods, you may recognize these individuals with quite a bit of fear, considering that they're the most terrifying thing in the game behind Vanessa! I mean, look at these guys! You take one wrong step and bump into them and BAM! You're on your way down a one-way track to Pain Town. Oh, you can run, sure, but these freaks will chase you to the ends of the earth. Or, at least until they get tired, anyway. Actually, it's a little-known fact. They take a while to go down, but you can kill them if you have enough patience and guts. Or if you have the brewing badge equipped. Now, if you don't recognize these creeps, they'd be seen scattered all around Mafia Town at night, cleaning up the mud and filth left behind from the Mafia and rain. As a gameplay element, they acted as barriers to certain areas where the players weren't meant to go. The janitor bots actually aren't the only inventions of Thor's that we see in Mafia at Night. Originally, the various cannons located around the town were also going to have been inventions by his. This is confirmed in the third act of Mafia Town, the beta build of the game, titled Repairing the Cannon, where Thor states that they're his cannons. In taking a look at this particular act, you can easily tell that's simply a placeholder act, and all you really have to do is climb up to Thor to talk to him. Next up, we've got the last confirmed invention of Thor's I can think of. That's going to be the Airmobile's land-based cousin, the Sandmobile, also referred to in some places as the Sand Buggy. Now, if you know a thing or two about a certain cut chapter called Sanded Sails, then you've probably seen this buggy in action before. As a matter of fact, there's even promotional art of Hat Kid driving around in it. This sand-plowing land-based vehicle was going to be Hat Kid's main method of travel through the Great Desert while going between villages. Let's take a look at it, shall we? Here, we have the Sandmobile in the beta. As you can see, it's rather unfinished in this stage, lacking sounds and animations. When Hat Kid jumps into it, it immediately begins moving forward, and jumping in it will launch Hat Kid super fast. In this footage, we have the Sandmobile in the speedrun preview build from September 2017, a month before the game's final release. Don't see it? That's because the speedrun build only contains the assets it uses, so unused things like the Sandmobile don't have models. Well, that was the idea anyway. Obviously the sound effects and classes are still in this build, but an attempt was made in either case. Finally, let's take a look at the Sandmobile in its true final form in the final game, where it was left over for modders to use. As you can see, it accelerates, decelerates, plays sounds, and does everything else that's supposed to do. Now this right here is one fine, genuine vehicle, if I do say so myself. So, that's what we have for Thor's confirmed inventions. Let's take a look at things that we can speculate over. On this end, I have two separate machines of unknown origin. To start us off, we have the Robo-Shark from the beta version of Mafia Town. This machine acted as a barrier for Hat Kid while swimming, similar to how drowning functions as a game mechanic in the final game. You see, in earlier versions of the game, Hat Kid was actually able to swim for as long as she wanted, and could even dive underwater. As a matter of fact, diving is still a mechanic that's advertised in the player manual for the game. It's sad to see this function go. Things like the underwater Mafia Town theme variation, and the fish in underwater ponds go nearly completely unused in the final game, just because it's so tedious to get below the surface of the ocean. A few mods have tried their hands at re-implementing swimming, but the swimming badge just doesn't work the way that swimming used to, and unfortunately we still haven't seen a recreation of how it was done in the beta as of today. Anyway, the Robo-Shark worked as a sort of lifeguard, or coast guard, to Mafia Town. If Hat Kid swims too far from the shore, the Robo-Shark will grab her and bring her back to the coast. I put this one near the end of this list because, despite the fact that it seems very akin to Thor's other creations, it's never confirmed that the Robo-Shark was created by Thor, at least not from what I've seen. We also have two non-robot inventions in the form of umbrella upgrades, one of which never saw itself outside the earliest versions of the games, and those are the Hookshot and Pogo upgrade. It seems relatively likely that these will have been issued to the player by Thor, as, in the prototype and alpha builds of the game, Hat Kid received them at the very start of Mafia on Fire, immediately after talking to Thor. The Pogo upgrade was an upgrade that allowed Hat Kid to jump on her umbrella like a pogo stick, if the player were holding down right-click. Hey, editor's note really quick. So this isn't actually part of the script that I wrote out. I'm just adding this in last second because I'm a goofball and I forgot about it entirely. There is an entire other upgrade for the umbrella for Hat Kid that you have gotten from Thor called the propeller upgrade. Again, another one where we're not 100% certain whether or not it was going to be actually made by Thor, but the only footage we have of it, you receive it from talking to Thor. So, yeah. Alright, back to the video. Finally, this is something that seems much less likely to have been made by Thor, but still going on the list simply because I don't know who else could have made it, and that is the Mafia Bot. The Mafia Bots were an enemy used in Mafia Town's beta. They had a few functions, including, but not limited to, flying, stealing your stuff, running away from you, dying, and unlocking things after you kill them. The Mafia bot's voice lines were reused for Roomby in the final game, but most lines still actually remain completely unused or in the editor. Like I said earlier, the only reason why I decided to put the Mafia boss on the list of things Thor may have invented is simply because nobody else in Mafia Town is smart or mechanically inclined enough to make robots. However, these guys are much different than any of Thor's inventions, not only being very makeshift looking, but also being, well, bad robots that help Mafia instead of the player. It may have been that the Mafia themselves were trying to copy Thor's ability to create machines and wound up with these robots, but unfortunately we'll never know for sure. So anyway, those were his inventions. Let's take a minute to talk about Thor himself. Let's jump back to the original question I asked a few minutes ago. Who is this strapping, handsome fellow? Well, in earlier drafts of Mafia Town, Thor appeared to be a character who would assist Hat Kid in taking down the Mafia. Obviously, considering the fact that his workshop was still there and not, well, destroyed, and he was never driven out by the Mafia, it appears as though the Mafia either somehow didn't really know about him, or just didn't care enough that he was there, which would simply imply that Thor himself never actually went out of his way to hinder the Mafia in the way that Mustache Girl did. However, we can tell by some of his lines, including how he speaks to the Mafia goons in the earlier versions of Mafia on Fire, that he isn't exactly a fan of the Mafia and the problems they cause to the town. Opposite to this, he tends to speak very nicely and respectfully to Hat Kid, seeing her in later ports of development as a genius like himself for being able to fix his cannons. He also seems to speak with a very responsible tone to Hat Kid and Mustache Girl, promising to Hat Kid to find her parents upon meeting her and assuming that she's a lost child, and warning Mustache Girl that the Mafia and cannons could be dangerous to use. Thor also appears to speak with a kind of southern accent. Obviously, it's kind of hard to tell without an actual voice actor, but it's a good guess based off of his mannerisms. All around, Thor seemed to be a pretty nice guy who looked out for people. Now, there is one last thing worth mentioning before we switch off to our second half of the video, and that's Thor's cap. Yes indeed, like Timmy's cap and the old witch hat, Thor's cap was going to be wearable by the player. As a matter of fact, it still is in some ways. A version of Thor's cap can be obtained in the Rift token machine as a level 3 rarity sprint cap replacement. I specify when saying a version and not just Thor's cap, because it's actually different than Thor's cap, as you can clearly see here. This was actually a higher level version from when hats could be upgraded, a feature which we'll discuss in a different video someday. But essentially, hats could receive upgrades, which was later given to badges and then scrapped entirely. Interestingly though, this version of Thor's cap still uses the original icon, even though it looks different. I probably wouldn't go into much detail if it weren't for the fact that there's more to Thor's cap than simply a sprint cap replacement. See, in both the alpha and beta builds of the game, Thor's cap is obtainable as well, with it appearing behind the lighthouse after you press a button in the alpha, and inside a chest in the subcon caves in the beta. In the alpha version of the game, the hat is purely cosmetic, it doesn't actually do anything. However, in the beta, Thor's cap holds a unique ability that didn't make it into the final game, and that is the ability to perform an air slash attack. When Hat Kid attacks while in the air, she'll stop all her momentum and swing her umbrella around, before returning to Earth's gravitational pull afterwards. I can't say whether or not the hat is still in the game now, but at least as of 1.0, Thor's cap could be spawned in using console commands. So anyway, this is just about everything I could come up with about Thor as a character and gameplay piece, so let's move on to what came after he went. As we know, one of Thor's original uses to the game was to upgrade Hat Kid's equipment, a use that would probably have made him quite similar to Funky Kong in DK64. So what happened to this upgrade feature after Thor was cut from the game? Well, we actually know that during the alpha stage of the game's development, this feature was reused in a completely different place than with Thor. According to this article written on January 26, 2015, in which a Hat in Time's final composer, Pascal, was interviewed about his music, it is mentioned that the black market was actually going to be used in order to get upgrades. It's very fascinating to me. Of everything I've seen online, this is the only place where in which someone has mentioned what the black market was going to be used for. But sure enough, it mentions that the music inside the black market would have been an 8-bit version of the Mafia Town theme. And there is indeed an 8-bit rendition of Welcome to Mafia Town on the B-side soundtrack. So I don't think this is an error or mix-up on behalf of the writer. It seems like this is definitely what black market was going to be used for. What's also interesting is that Thor was very much still in the game at this point, so Gears for Breakfast must have decided that they had other uses for him than just an upgrade station earlier on. Next up, we have the matter of Thor's inventions. Well, in the final game, we don't really see many of them at all. The cannons are still there, and sure, they're unexplained, but there's really not an incredible amount of advanced scientific understanding that has to go behind making a cannon. Maybe for a really advanced one, sure, but the general premise isn't too hard to understand, and I'm sure the Mafia could have managed just fine. As for the rest of Thor's inventions, well, the metal umbrella, pogo upgrade, airmobile, sand buggy, janitors, robo-shark, and Mafia bots are all gone in the final game, and the hookshot comes from Subcom. I guess when the machines all got axed, Thor didn't have much of a use in lore anymore. Either that, or it was the other way around. But in any case, there's no Thor or machines in the final Mafia Town, and with sand and sails becoming Alpine Skyline, their sand and air vehicles were no longer necessary.
But Wolfclock, you must be saying. Surely there was more to him. Surely Thor had more value to his name than simply an explanation for all the robots everywhere. He can't just be a product of his own creations, can he? Can all his personality, all of his experiences, all of his own thoughts and memories be thrown into the void of eternity as if nothing ever existed? Oh, the humanity!
And to that I answer, yes. Thor left a void that needed filling far past the removal of his machines. His roles needed re-rolling as well. In the final game, Thor's place in heating up Mafia Town as a tutorial character explaining what happened was left up to the Goofy Mafia to fill. You can actually still see this in the final game as well. If you go into the localization files for whatever language you speak, you'll find that in the Sequences folder, a file with the name of Thor still exists, and if you open it up, you'll be greeted with the Goofy Mafia's lines from heating up Mafia Town. Even though Thor himself is gone, I'd say his legacy still stands. Behind the Moonjumper and Timmy, Thor is probably one of the most known and beloved cut characters of A Hat in Time, and, had it not been for our blue-faced, two-dimensional friend, he probably would have been the face of the game's cut content world as a whole. If it wasn't for Thor, the parts of Mafia Town which eventually became the platforms for She Came From Outer Space wouldn't exist, and even now we still see the marks he left in the final game. Well folks, I think that just about covers everything. Thank you all so much for watching. If you'd like to stay up to date on my uploads, feel free to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. Don't worry, I don't post a lot. If you'd really like to help me out, feel free to leave a like and share this around. It helps me a lot more than you would imagine. If you've got a particular topic you'd like to see in a future episode, let me know in the comments and I might cover it sometime in the future. Thank you all one more time for watching, and I'll see you guys around in the next episode.